"Get that trash bag away from the weapons, Grandma." Captain Derek Morrison's voice cracked across Fort Bragg's shooting range. The janitor's hand trembled as she gripped her mop. Raven Thorne, 48, gray-streaked hair and a messy bun, kept her eyes down. Her faded gray t-shirt and worn boots marked her as nobody important. "I said move!" Morrison grabbed her wrist, yanking it up to reveal a faded tattoo. A serpent eating its tail with a black star inside. "What's this? Playing soldier with fake ink?" 5 Delta Force operators circled her, phones out, live streaming the humiliation. Morrison towered over her at 6'3", bald head gleaming, muscles straining his tactical shirt. "Stolen valor," Staff Sergeant Reeves sneered. "That's jail time, cleaning lady." Raven's trembling worsened, but her breathing stayed perfectly controlled. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. A sniper's rhythm. Only Major Chen noticed. "One shot," Raven said quietly. "I'll take 1 shot, then you leave me alone." Morrison laughed. "Sure, Grandma. Show us your warrior skills." The M24 rifle shook in her unsteady hands. The operators mocked her stance, her grip, everything wrong. But Chen saw something else. The way Raven's eyes calculated distance without the scope, how her tremor followed a pattern, waiting for the still point between shakes. Nobody expected what happened next. In exactly 18 minutes, every person on this range would understand why some secrets are better left buried, and why the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone ignores. If watching this injustice makes you as angry as it makes me, please take a second to like and subscribe. It truly helps these stories of hidden strength reach more people. And if you want to show stronger support, the thanks button below is a wonderful way to help me keep creating. Now, let's see how Raven responds to this public humiliation. The small crowd of operators had grown now. Specialist Marcus Webb, known for his cruel pranks and dirty tricks in training, sauntered over with his phone already recording. "This is going to be gold," he muttered, angling for the best shot of the cleaning lady being put in her place. His stocky frame blocked the morning light as he positioned himself for maximum entertainment value. "That's not even good ink work," Jessica Hayes, the unit's intelligence specialist and social media maven, chimed in as she started her own live stream. Her blonde ponytail swung as she leaned in for a better look, her perfectly applied tactical makeup somehow surviving the morning's exercises. "Looks like something you'd get in a back alley for $20. Did you lose a bet, cleaning lady?" The situation was spiraling exactly as these scenarios always did, the pack mentality taking over, each member trying to outdo the last in their mockery. But there was something different about how Raven stood there, something in the way she hadn't tried to pull her arm back from Morrison's grip, hadn't protested or defended herself. She simply existed in that moment, with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. Major Amanda Chen stepped forward slightly, her instincts prickling. She'd been with the unit for 5 years, had seen combat in 3 different countries, and something about this situation felt wrong. The way Raven's eyes tracked each person without moving her head, the way her breathing remained perfectly controlled despite the harassment. These weren't the reactions of a frightened civilian. "I know exactly what it is," Reeves announced with the authority of someone who'd studied military insignias and unit patches as a hobby. "It's fake stolen valor crap. Probably saw it in some Vietnam movie and thought it would make her look tough. Newsflash, lady. Wearing military symbols you didn't earn is illegal." Morrison released Raven's wrist with a slight shove, causing her to take a half step back. But even that movement was controlled, her worn combat boots finding perfect balance on the concrete. "You know what? I think we need to teach Grandma here a lesson about respect, about not pretending to be something you're not." "Just leave her alone, Morrison," Chen finally spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of her rank, even though she rarely pulled it. "She's just trying to do her job." Morrison spun on her, his jaw tight. "You defending stolen valor now, Major? This old bag is walking around with military ink she didn't earn. That disrespects every one of us who bled for our insignias." "You don't know that she didn't earn it," Chen countered, but her argument sounded weak even to her own ears. What were the odds that this trembling janitor was anything more than what she appeared? "Oh, please," Hayes laughed, still streaming to her 3,000 followers. "Look at her. She can barely hold that cleaning rag steady. You think someone with those shaky hands ever held a weapon? This is pathetic." Webb had moved around to get a different angle, nearly knocking over Raven's cleaning cart in his eagerness. A few supplies scattered across the ground, standard cleaning solutions, rags, and something else that caught Chen's eye for just a moment. Was that a specialized gun cleaning cloth? The kind that cost $50 and was used exclusively for precision rifle maintenance? "Pick up your mess," Morrison ordered, pointing at the scattered supplies. "And then I want you out of here. This is a restricted area for qualified personnel only." Raven slowly knelt, her movements deliberate, as she began gathering her supplies. The tremor in her hands seemed more pronounced now, making the simple task appear almost pitiful. But Chen noticed something else. The way Raven's eyes swept the ground in a pattern. The way she positioned herself to keep all 5 operators in her peripheral vision, while appearing to focus only on her task. "Actually," Morrison said, a cruel smile spreading across his face, "I've got a better idea. You want to wear military tattoos? You want to pretend you're some kind of warrior? Fine. Let's see what you've got." He gestured toward the weapons rack. "Pick up a rifle. Show us your warrior skills." The other operators laughed, the sound harsh and mocking in the morning air. This was going to be even better than they'd hoped, watching the old cleaning lady try to handle a weapon she'd probably never seen outside of movies. "I don't think that's a good idea," Raven said quietly, still kneeling by her scattered supplies. "Oh, she speaks," Webb crowed. "Come on, Grandma, don't be shy. Morrison's giving you a chance to prove you're not completely full of it." "Stand up," Morrison commanded, his voice taking on the edge it had in combat situations. This wasn't a request anymore. That's an order. Raven's medical monitoring device on her right wrist, a sophisticated piece of equipment originally developed for NASA astronauts, but now adapted for patients with chronic nerve damage, emitted a soft beep as her heart rate spiked slightly. The neural inhibitor medication in her pocket, which cost nearly $1,000 per dose and was the only thing that helped control the tremors from combat-related nerve agent exposure, rattled slightly as she stood. But no one noticed these high-tech medical details that seemed so out of place for a simple janitor. She rose slowly, her movements careful and measured. The morning sun caught her face, highlighting the freckles across her nose and cheeks, making her appear almost vulnerable. But there was something in her eyes now, a flicker of something that made Chen take an involuntary step closer. "I really should get back to work," Raven said, her voice still soft but carrying an undertone that hadn't been there before. "Work?" Morrison stepped into her personal space, using his significant height advantage to loom over her. "Your work is whatever I say it is right now, and I say your work is proving you have any right to wear that tattoo. Unless you want me to report you for stolen valor. That comes with jail time, you know." The lie rolled off his tongue easily. Stolen valor laws were specific and wouldn't apply to a simple tattoo, but he was betting the cleaning lady didn't know that. The intimidation tactic usually worked on civilians. Hayes zoomed her phone camera in on Raven's face. "Oh, this is perfect. Local janitor exposed for fake military service. This is going to go viral, guys." "One shot," Raven said suddenly, her words cutting through the mockery like a blade. "I'll take one shot, and then you'll let me get back to work." The operators exchanged glances, their grins widening. This was even better than they'd hoped. "One shot?" Morrison laughed. "Sure, Grandma, one shot. Hell, I'll make it easy for you." He walked to the weapons rack and pulled out an old M24 SWS, the rifle covered in dust from sitting unused in the back of the rack. "This piece of junk should be perfect for you. It's about as worn out as you are." He thrust the rifle toward Raven, who looked at it for a long moment before reaching out with trembling hands to take it. The weapon seemed to dwarf her slight frame, and the shaking in her hands made it appear as if she could barely support its weight. "This is going to be embarrassing," Webb stage whispered to his phone camera, taking bets on whether she even knows which end the bullet comes out of. Raven held the rifle awkwardly, her stance all wrong, her grip loose and uncertain. The operators were already laughing, Hayes providing running commentary for her live stream about Grandma's first gun. But Chen watched more carefully, and what she saw made her frown. Because in that split second when Raven had first touched the rifle, Before she'd adopted the awkward stance, her hands had found the correct position automatically. It was muscle memory, buried deep but still there. And now, as Raven fumbled with the weapon, Chen realized she was deliberately holding it wrong. "Safety's on the other side, Grandma," Reeves called out helpfully, his voice dripping with false concern. "The little switch? You have to flip it before the gun works." Raven's fingers found the safety, and as she manipulated it, Chen caught another tell, the way her index finger stayed perfectly straight along the receiver, never entering the trigger guard until she was ready. That was trained behavior, drilled into military and law enforcement until it became unconscious habit. "All right, let's see what you've got," Morrison announced, gesturing grandly toward the range. "Standard target, 100 meters. Nice and easy. Try not to hurt yourself." The group moved toward the firing line, Morrison roughly guiding Raven by the elbow, as if she might wander off and accidentally shoot someone. The tremor in her hands seemed to worsen with each step, making the rifle shake visibly. "Maybe we should get her a bench rest," Hayes suggested with fake sympathy. "I don't think she can hold it steady enough to even aim." "No," Morrison said firmly. "She wants to pretend she's earned that tattoo. She can shoot like a real soldier, standing position, unsupported." They reached the firing line, and Raven stood there for a moment, the rifle hanging loosely in her grip. She lifted it slowly, the motion unsteady, and attempted to sight down the range. Her stance was still wrong, feet too close together, weight distributed poorly. Any drill instructor would have had a field day correcting her numerous mistakes. "This is painful to watch," Webb commented, making sure his phone captured every awkward moment. "It's like watching a toddler try to use power tools." But Chen was watching Raven's eyes, and what she saw there made her pull out her own phone. Not to record, but to access something else entirely. Because behind the apparent confusion and trembling hands, Raven's eyes were calculating. Distance, wind speed, elevation. Chen could see her processing variables that a janitor shouldn't even know existed. "Whenever you're ready, Grandma," Morrison said mockingly. "Take your time. We've got all day to watch you embarrass yourself." Raven lowered the rifle slightly, her head tilting as if listening to something. Then she raised it again, and in that motion something shifted. It was subtle, so subtle that most of the observers missed it entirely, but Chen saw it clearly. The awkwardness fell away for just a fraction of a second, replaced by something that made Chen's blood run cold. Because in that instant, Raven Thorne didn't look like a janitor anymore. She looked like a predator that had finally decided to show its teeth. The rifle came up smoothly, the tremor still there but somehow incorporated into the motion, rather than fighting against it. Her stance shifted minutely, weight redistributing in a way that spoke of years of training. And then, without any of the hesitation or uncertainty she'd shown moments before, she fired. The report was sharp in the morning air, and downrange, the target showed a perfect center hit. Silence descended on the group like a physical weight. Morrison's mouth hung open slightly, his next mocking comment dying unspoken. Hayes had stopped her commentary mid-sentence. Webb's phone hand had dropped slightly, as if he'd forgotten he was recording. "Lucky shot," Morrison said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Raven lowered the rifle, the tremor returning to her hands. She looked at Morrison with those calm green eyes. "The firing pin on this rifle is misaligned by approximately 0.3 millimeters, she said conversationally, as if discussing the weather. "It's causing a slight deviation that most shooters would compensate for unconsciously after a few rounds, but if you know it's there, you can adjust for it immediately." The technical assessment, delivered in that soft, rasping voice, hit the group like a slap. Reeves, the weapons expert, stepped forward and took the rifle, examining the action. After a moment, his face paled slightly. "Holy cow," he breathed. "She's right. How could you possibly know that without—" "Without what?" Raven asked mildly. "Without examining it properly? Without years of experience with this exact model? Without having field-stripped hundreds of them in conditions where a misaligned pin meant the difference between life and death?" The questions hung in the air, each one adding another layer to the growing unease among the operators. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. The cleaning lady was supposed to fumble with the weapon, maybe accidentally drop it, give them all a good laugh and a viral video. She wasn't supposed to diagnose mechanical issues that even their unit's armorer might miss. "All right," Morrison said, rallying his bravado. "So you know a little about rifles. Big deal. Anyone can get lucky once and spout some technical stuff they read online. Let's see you do it again. 300 meters this time, 5 shots, tight grouping. That'll prove whether you actually know what you're doing or if this is all an act." Chen wanted to intervene, to stop this before it went any further. But something in Raven's expression stopped her. There was resignation there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like anticipation. Did you notice something special about how Raven holds the rifle? Comment below if you caught this mysterious detail, or share when you were underestimated like this. What comes next will leave everyone speechless. 5 shots, Raven repeated quietly. 300 meters. And then you'll let me get back to cleaning? Sure, Morrison agreed, his confidence returning. 5 shots, and if you can't put them all in the black, you admit that tattoo is fake and apologize for disrespecting real warriors. And if I do put them all in the black? Morrison laughed, the sound harsh and dismissive. Then I'll personally clean every toilet in this facility for a month. But that's not going to happen, is it, Grandma? Raven didn't respond. She simply raised the rifle again, and this time there was no pretense of awkwardness. The transformation wasn't dramatic or showy. It was the quiet efficiency of someone slipping back into a familiar role. Her breathing slowed, becoming deep and rhythmic. The tremor in her hands didn't disappear, but she seemed to time her movements between the shakes, finding the still points in her own disability. The first shot rang out, then the second, third, fourth, and fifth in steady succession. Not rushed, but with the measured pace of someone who had done this so many times, it had become meditation rather than action. Downrange, the electronic scoring system displayed the results, and Webb nearly dropped his phone. 5 shots, not just in the black, but in a group so tight they could be covered with a quarter. But that wasn't what made Morrison's face drain of color. It was the pattern. The 5 shots didn't form a random group. They spelled out a letter. V. Impossible, Morrison muttered, but the word came out as more of a question than a statement. The V is for Viper, Raven said quietly, setting the rifle down with careful precision. The first letter of a call sign I haven't used in 15 years. Would you like to see the other 4 letters, Captain? Or can I get back to my job now? The challenge in her words was unmistakable, despite the soft delivery. She stood there, slight and trembling, her gray t-shirt stained with cleaning solution, her high bun slightly disheveled from the morning's work. But something fundamental had shifted in how the operators saw her. The freckles across her cheeks no longer made her look vulnerable. They looked like camouflage. The tremor in her hands wasn't weakness. It was a disability overcome through sheer will and skill. "Who are you?" Chen asked, the question escaping before she could stop it. Raven turned those green eyes on her, and for a moment, Chen felt like she was being evaluated by something far more dangerous than she'd initially assumed. "I'm the janitor," Raven said simply. "Nothing more, nothing less. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She turned to go, but Morrison's hand shot out, grabbing her arm again. This time, however, the reaction was different. Raven's body moved in a way that was subtle, but unmistakable to anyone with combat training. Her weight shifted. Her free hand came up in what would have been a perfect counter-strike position, and her eyes went completely flat, like a switch had been flipped. Morrison jerked his hand back as if he'd touched a live wire, and in that moment, everyone present understood that they had made a terrible mistake. This wasn't some delusional civilian playing soldier. This was something else entirely. "Don't touch me again," Raven said, and though her voice remained quiet, it carried the kind of command authority that made seasoned operators take an involuntary step back. "Ma'am," Chen said, surprising everyone including herself by using the honorific. "I'm going to need to see some identification." Raven studied her for a long moment, and Chen got the distinct impression she was being measured against some invisible standard. Finally, Raven reached into her pocket and pulled out what looked like a standard civilian ID card. But as she handed it over, Chen caught a glimpse of something else in that pocket. Something that looked suspiciously like a challenge coin, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. The ID card showed exactly what they expected. Raven Thorn, custodial staff, with all the proper clearances for base access. Nothing unusual, nothing that would indicate the skill they'd just witnessed. But Chen noticed something about the cardstock itself, the way it felt between her fingers. It was too heavy, too rigid. This wasn't a standard ID card. It was something designed to look like one while being something else entirely. "Everything seems to be in order," Chen said slowly, handing the card back. As she did, their fingers brushed, and she felt the calluses on Raven's hands. Not the calluses of a janitor, but the specific patterns that came from years of trigger work. "Of course it is," Morrison interjected, his bravado returning now that the immediate threat seemed to have passed. "She probably just spends all her minimum wage on range time, trying to relive glory days that never existed. Isn't that right, Grandma? You were probably some rear-echelon paper pusher who heard war stories and decided to reinvent yourself as a hero." The insult was designed to provoke, to restore the power dynamic that had been so thoroughly disrupted. Morrison needed to regain control of the situation, to put the world back in order where Delta Force operators were the apex predators and janitors were just janitors. But before Raven could respond, if she was even going to, the morning's routine was shattered by something far more serious than their petty confrontation. The alarm klaxon split the air with its distinctive wail, the one reserved for only the most serious threats. Red lights began flashing across the facility as the automated system kicked in. "Attention! Attention! Active shooter alert! All personnel take cover. This is not a drill." The transformation in the operators was instantaneous. Personal conflicts forgotten, they immediately went into combat mode, weapons appearing in hands with practiced efficiency. Morrison began barking orders, establishing sectors of fire and defensive positions. Hayes killed her livestream and pulled her sidearm. Webb and Reeves moved to cover the main approaches to the range. Chen grabbed her radio, trying to get more information from base security, but the channels were chaos. Multiple reports coming in, conflicting information, no clear picture of what was happening. And in the middle of it all, Raven Thorn stood perfectly still, her head tilted slightly, as if listening to something no one else could hear. "Movement," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the radio chatter and shouted orders. "Northwest, approximately 1,200 meters. Elevated position, probably the water tower or the construction scaffolding on Building 7. Morrison spun toward her. "How could you possibly—" The first shot cracked across the distance, and concrete exploded inches from where Morrison had been standing. If he hadn't turned to challenge Raven, he'd be dead. "Down!" Chen screamed, but the operators were already moving, combat experience taking over as they sought cover behind the concrete barriers of the range. Another shot, then another, walking across their position with methodical precision. This wasn't random violence. This was a trained sniper, and they were all trapped in the kill zone. "We need to move," Morrison shouted, "covering fire and leapfrog to the equipment building." It was the textbook response, exactly what their training dictated. But Raven shook her head slightly, still standing in the open as if the bullets couldn't touch her. "He's not trying to hit you," she said, that same conversational tone at odds with the chaos around them. "He's hurting you. The equipment building is the secondary kill zone. Probably has it pre-registered for indirect fire or rigged with explosives." "Get down, you idiot!" Webb screamed at her, but Raven was moving now, not toward cover, but toward the weapons rack. Another shot cracks past, close enough to ruffle her hair, but she didn't flinch. Her hands, still trembling with that persistent neural damage, found the Barrett .50 caliber rifle with the ease of long practice. The weapon was massive, designed for extreme long-range engagement, and should have been almost impossible for someone of her size to handle effectively. But she lifted it with an economy of motion that spoke of intimate familiarity. "You can't seriously think," Morrison began, but Raven was already moving. She didn't run, she walked, each step measured and deliberate, using the rhythm of the sniper's shots to time her movement. It was like watching someone dance between raindrops, except the raindrops were bullets that could tear a human body in half. Chen watched in stunned amazement as Raven reached a position behind one of the concrete barriers, the heavy rifle moving with her as if it weighed nothing. The janitor was gone completely now, replaced by something that moved with the kind of lethal grace Chen had only seen in the most elite operators she'd ever worked with. "Range?" Raven asked, not looking at anyone in particular. 1,200 meters, like you said," Chen found herself responding. "Maybe 1,250. "Wind?" Chen checked her weather app with hands that weren't quite steady. 5 knots from the west, gusting to 8. "Understood." Raven settled into position, and the transformation was complete. The tremor was still there, but she seemed to breathe around it, finding the spaces between the shakes where her body was still. The massive rifle became an extension of her will, and Chen realized with a chill that she was watching a master at work. Through the optic, Raven could see what the others couldn't, not just the sniper's position but the entire tactical situation. The shooter had chosen his position well, with clear fields of fire and multiple escape routes, but he'd made one mistake, probably because he hadn't expected to face counter-sniper fire from a military cleaning lady. He'd silhouetted himself against the morning sky. It was a tiny target at that range, barely visible even through the powerful scope. With the wind in the distance, most trained snipers would need multiple shots to find their range. But Raven didn't have multiple shots. She had one chance before the shooter realized he was facing something more than scared operators scrambling for cover. If this moment has you holding your breath, share this with someone who needs to see that true strength doesn't show off. Because what's about to happen will change everything. Ready? The Barrett was not a subtle weapon. When it fired, the concussion was like a physical blow, the sound rolling across the base like thunder. The recoil should have knocked Raven backwards, but she rode it with practiced ease, her body moving with the rifle rather than against it. For a moment, nothing happened. The incoming fire continued, another shot cracking past their position. Morrison started to say something, probably mocking her for missing, but then the incoming fire stopped. 1 second. 2. 3. Chen's radio crackled to life. "Base security to all units. Threat neutralized. Repeat, threat neutralized. Sniper down." The silence that followed was profound. 5 of the most elite operators in the United States military stood frozen, staring at the slight woman with the trembling hands who had just made a shot that maybe a dozen people in the world could have made under those conditions. "How?" Morrison's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. Raven was already safing the weapon, her movements automatic and efficient. "Elevation compensation for a descending target," she said matter-of-factly. He was starting to displace when he realized counter-sniper operations were in play. The movement made him predictable. She set the rifle down and turned to face them, and Chen saw something in her eyes that made her stomach clench. It wasn't pride or satisfaction. It was weariness, the kind that came from carrying secrets too heavy for any one person to bear. "Who are you?" Morrison asked again. But this time there was no mockery in it, only a desperate need to understand how his world had just been turned upside down. Before Raven could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Not just any vehicles. Chen recognized the distinctive growl of up-armored SUVs moving at high speed, the kind of response that didn't happen for a simple shooting incident. 3 black vehicles roared onto the range, their tires screaming as they formed a protective formation. Doors flew open, and soldiers emerged, but these weren't regular security forces. These were operators from the Army's most elite unit, the kind whose very existence was often denied. And then, from the center vehicle, emerged a figure that made every person present snap to attention instinctively. General Patricia Stone, 5 stars gleaming on her shoulders, stepped onto the range with the kind of presence that commanded immediate and absolute respect. At 62, she still moved with the fluid grace of a warrior, her steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun that matched Raven's style. Her face was a map of hard-won experience, and her eyes were the same shade of green as Raven's. The general's security detail spread out, securing the area with practiced efficiency, but Stone herself only had eyes for one person. She walked directly toward Raven, her measured stride eating up the distance between them. Morrison and his team stood frozen, their minds struggling to process what they were seeing. Five-star generals didn't respond personally to shooting incidents. They certainly didn't look at cleaning ladies with the kind of recognition that was dawning on Stone's face. "My God," the general breathed, stopping just feet from Raven. "It really is you." The morning air seemed to crystallize around them, every person present holding their breath as General Patricia Stone stood face to face with the woman they'd known only as a janitor. The silence stretched taut, filled with the weight of unspoken history. Then, in a move that would be burned into the memory of every witness, General Patricia Stone, commander of the United States Army Special Operations Command, slowly began to roll up her right sleeve. The fabric revealed scarred skin, marked by years of combat, and there, on her forearm, was an identical tattoo. The same serpent eating its tail, the same five-pointed star at its center, though this one was slightly newer, the lines crisper. "Viper 7, Stone said quietly, her voice carrying across the range despite its low volume. "Reporting to Viper 1. And then, in full view of some of the most elite soldiers in the American military, a five-star general dropped to one knee. The gesture was so unexpected, so contrary to every protocol and tradition, that Morrison actually staggered backward. His team stood frozen, their worldview shattering in real time, as they watched one of the highest-ranking officers in the military kneel before a woman in a janitor's uniform. "Don't," Raven said softly, and for the first time since the confrontation began, there was real emotion in her voice. "Patricia, please, don't do this." 15 years, Stone continued, still kneeling. 15 years we thought you were dead. When the chemical weapons hit, when the extraction failed, when we found blood but no body. Her voice cracked slightly. We held a memorial service. Your star is on the wall at Langley. The operators exchanged stunned glances. The wall at CIA headquarters was reserved for officers killed in action. Their names forever classified. Their sacrifices known only to a select few. "I had my reasons," Raven said, reaching down to help Stone to her feet. The general accepted the hand, and as she rose, the two women embraced briefly, a gesture that spoke of bonds forged in places where rank meant nothing and trust meant everything. "Major Chen," Stone said, turning her laser-focused attention to the Delta Force officer. "Run the name Raven Thorn through the classified database. Authorization Stone 77 Alpha." Chen's fingers flew over her phone, accessing databases that required the highest security clearances. After a moment, her face went pale. "Ma'am, I'm getting a redirect to a file it's beyond my clearance level." "Override. Stone 99 Zulu." Chen input the code, and what appeared on her screen made her hands shake. She looked up at Raven with something approaching awe. "Viper 1. 317 confirmed kills. Operation Black Serpent. Operation Silent Rainfall. Operation..." She paused, swallowing hard. "Operation Crimson Ghost." Morrison made a choking sound. Every special operator knew about Crimson Ghost, though most dismissed it as legend. A single sniper holding off an entire battalion for 72 hours, allowing a trapped diplomatic convoy to escape. The sniper had supposedly eliminated targets at ranges that pushed the very limits of ballistic possibility, in weather conditions that should have made accurate shooting impossible. "That was you?" Morrison's voice came out as barely more than a croak. "But the report said the sniper died. Chemical weapons." "The report said what it needed to say," Raven replied, absently rubbing her trembling right hand. "Sometimes the best way to protect people is to stop existing." Stone's security detail had formed a perimeter, their faces professionally blank, but their body language screaming curiosity. These were men and women who had seen everything, done everything, and yet they were witnessing something that transcended their experience. "The tremor," Webb said suddenly, the pieces falling into place. "Nerve agent exposure. That's why your hands shake." Raven glanced at him, a faint smile touching her lips. "VX variant, modified for persistence. My nervous system will never fully recover, but..." She gestured toward the distant water tower where the sniper had been. Adaptation is possible. 1,200 meters, Reeves breathed. With nerve damage, with hand tremors, into a gusting wind. That's not possible. Your definition of possible is limited by your experience, Raven said mildly. When you've spent 3 days in a bell tower in Sarajevo, making shots through blizzard conditions while slowly dying from blood loss, you learn to expand your definitions. Hayes had pulled up her phone again, not to live stream but to search. Her face cycled through expressions of disbelief as she found fragments of information, tiny pieces of a legend that had been carefully buried. The phantom sniper of Kandahar, the ghost of Mogadishu, the Belgrade shadow. That was all you? Names, Raven said dismissively. Labels created by people trying to make sense of something they couldn't understand. I was just a soldier doing her job. Just a soldier? Morrison laughed. But it was a broken sound, devoid of his earlier arrogance. You're the reason we exist. The Viper program was the prototype for every special operations sniper school that came after. You wrote the book we all learned from. I wrote a book, Raven corrected. Others improved on it. Evolution of warfare, Captain. Each generation builds on what came before. Stone stepped forward, her command presence filling the space. What I want to know is why. Why fake your death? Why disappear? And why in God's name are you working as a janitor at Fort Bragg? For the first time, Raven looked uncomfortable. She glanced around at the gathered soldiers, then back at Stone. That's a conversation for a secure room, General. No, Morrison interjected, surprising everyone. No more secrets. I, publicly humiliated you, grabbed you, threatened you. The least you can do is tell us why we just assaulted a national hero. The silence stretched again, and then Raven sighed. It was a sound of profound weariness, of someone who had carried a burden alone for far too long. After Crimson Ghost, after the nerve agent, I was evacuated to a black site medical facility. The damage was extensive, not just physical, the psychological toll of that operation. She paused, her green eyes distant. I spent 6 months learning to function again, learning to shoot around the tremor, learning to be effective despite the disability. She moved to one of the concrete barriers, sitting on its edge with the casual ease of someone who had made peace with their limitations. During recovery, I had access to certain intelligence reports, things that suggested the ambush at Crimson Ghost wasn't random, that someone had leaked our position. Stone's face hardened. A mole? Multiple moles. A network that had penetrated various special operations units. People were dying because someone was selling our operational plans. Raven's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. I couldn't trust anyone, not even my own chain of command, so I made a choice. You went underground, Chen said, understanding dawning. You've been hunting them. For 15 years, Raven confirmed. Moving from base to base, job to job. Janitor, food service, maintenance. The invisible people who see everything but are never seen. Do you have any idea how much classified information is discussed within earshot of the cleaning staff? Morrison sank onto a bench, his head in his hands. Oh God, and we? You did exactly what people always do, Raven said without accusation. You saw what you expected to see. A middle-aged woman with a menial job, and assumed that was all there was. It's not your fault. It's human nature. 15 years, Stone repeated, shaking her head. What did you find? Everything, Raven said simply. Names, dates, operations. The network was larger than anyone imagined. But I needed proof that would stand up in court, not just battlefield justice. And the sniper today? Chen asked. Was he part of it? Raven nodded. Marcus Webb, you owe your life to Captain Morrison's ego. If he hadn't forced me to demonstrate my shooting, I wouldn't have been in position when the shooter made his move. The attack was meant to eliminate several key witnesses who were scheduled to testify in a classified hearing next week. Webb paled further, if that was possible. Witnesses to what? The network's latest operation. They're planning something big, something that makes everything else look like practice runs. Raven stood, brushing dust from her worn pants. "Which is why I'm breaking cover now. I've identified the major players, compiled the evidence, but I can't stop what's coming alone." Stone pulled out her secure phone, already moving into action. "I need a full briefing, everything you've learned." "You'll have it," Raven promised. "But first, there's something else that needs to be addressed." She turned to Morrison and his team, studying each face in turn. The arrogance was gone, replaced by shame, confusion, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. "You want to know why I let you mock me," she said. "It wasn't a question. Why I didn't immediately shut you down with credentials or demonstrations of skill." Morrison looked up, his face etched with misery. Yeah, I do. Because humility is the most important trait a warrior can possess," Raven said simply. "The moment you believe you're better than someone because of their appearance, their job, their age, or any other surface characteristic, you've lost the edge that keeps you alive. Today you learned that lesson in the safest possible way, with embarrassment rather than bullets." She moved closer, and Morrison found himself straightening unconsciously, responding to an authority that had nothing to do with rank and everything to do with presence. "You're good at what you do, Captain. Your record speaks for itself. But you've forgotten something essential. Respect isn't about strength or skill or who can mock whom the loudest. It's about recognizing the inherent worth in every person you meet, regardless of their station." Morrison swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "I don't want your apology," Raven said. "I want your growth. Take this lesson and become better. Teach others. Make sure the next generation of operators understands that the most dangerous person in any room might be the one everyone overlooks." She turned to Hayes, who was still clutching her phone. "You have a platform. Thousands of followers who look up to you. What message are you sending them? That it's acceptable to mock those you perceive as beneath you? That viral content matters more than basic human dignity?" Hayes flushed, unable to meet Raven's eyes. "I'll delete everything. Don't delete it," Raven interrupted. "Post it, all of it, including this moment. Show them the full story, how easy it is to judge, and how wrong those judgments can be. Make it a teaching moment." Reeves stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, the rifle. You knew about the misalignment instantly. How?" A ghost of a smile crossed Raven's face. "Serial number 418263. I zeroed that rifle in Afghanistan in 2003. Used it for 6 months before it was rotated back to the armory. Every weapon has its own personality, Sergeant. Learn them well enough, and they'll speak to you." "Will you stay?" Chen asked suddenly. "Now that your cover's blown, will you stay and teach?" Raven glanced at Stone, who nodded slightly. "The investigation is at a critical juncture. We have a week, maybe 2, before the network realizes they've been compromised. After that," she shrugged, "we'll see what the world needs from an old sniper with shaky hands." Stone's detail began moving, preparing for departure. The general herself lingered, her eyes never leaving Raven's face. "The memorial service," she said quietly. "We need to tell the others. Viper 3 is at Walter Reed. 4 retired to Montana. 6 runs a training facility in Virginia." "And 5? Raven asked. Stone's expression darkened. "5 was the mole. We confirmed it 3 years ago. He's the one who sold us out at Crimson Ghost." The tremor in Raven's hands worsened for a moment, before she regained control. "Then it's time to finish what we started." As the group began to disperse, Morrison called out. "Major Thorne!" He caught himself. "Sorry, what should I call you?" "Raven is fine," she said. "I haven't been Major anything for a long time." "What happens to us?" Morrison asked, gesturing to his team. "Our careers, after what we did." "That's up to you," Raven replied. "You can file a complaint about the janitor who showed you up. You can try to bury this and pretend it never happened. Or you can take the lesson and move forward. But if I might make a suggestion?" Morrison nodded eagerly, desperate for any path toward redemption. "General Stone is reforming the Viper program, updated for modern warfare, incorporating lessons learned from 15 years of continuous combat. She'll need instructors who understand not just the technical aspects of the job, but the human element, the importance of humility, the danger of assumptions. "You're offering us positions?" Webb asked incredulously. "I'm offering you the chance to earn positions," Raven corrected. "The selection process will make Delta Force qualification look like summer camp. Most of you won't make it, but those who do will be part of something larger than themselves." Morrison straightened, and for the first time since the confrontation began, there was hope in his eyes. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow," Stone interjected. 0530, Building 7. She smiled coldly. "Bring your humility. You'll need it." As the vehicles prepared to depart, Raven bent to collect her cleaning supplies. The simple act seemed surreal after everything that had been revealed, but she moved with the same careful precision she brought to everything. "You're not actually going back to cleaning, are you?" Hayes asked. "I have a shift to finish," Raven said matter-of-factly. "The floors don't clean themselves, and I've never left a job incomplete." It was such a mundane statement after the morning's revelations that several people laughed, the sound mixing relief and disbelief. "Besides," Raven added, hefting her mop with a slight smile, "you'd be amazed what people say around the janitor. There are still 2 members of the network on this base. I figure I've got about 6 hours before word spreads and they run." Stone shook her head in admiration. "Still working. Still hunting." "Always," Raven confirmed. "It's what I do." As she turned to go, Morrison called out one last time. "The tattoo, what does it really mean? The serpent eating its tail?" Raven paused, considering. Then she turned back, her green eyes holding depths that spoke of battles fought in shadows and victories that would never be celebrated. "Ouroboros," she said, "the eternal cycle, death and rebirth, the end that becomes a beginning." She looked at each of them in turn. "Today, something ended for all of you. The question is, what will you choose to begin?" The aftermath of the morning's events rippled through Fort Bragg like a stone dropped in still water. Within hours, the video Hayes posted, the full, unedited encounter, had gone viral in military circles. The hashtag #RespectTheJanitor began trending, sparking conversations about assumptions, hidden service, and the quiet heroes who walked among them. Morrison and his team reported to Building 7 the next morning, where they found not just a training facility, but a complete reimagining of special operations doctrine. The first lesson, written on a whiteboard in Raven's precise hand, set the tone for everything that followed. The most dangerous operative is the one nobody sees coming. Be that operative. Webb washed out after 3 weeks, unable to overcome the physical demands despite his determination. But he didn't return to his unit bitter or broken. Instead, he requested assignment to the training cadre, becoming one of the program's most effective advocates. "I may not be able to do it," he told recruits, "but I can make sure you understand why it matters." Hayes lasted longer, but ultimately chose a different path. The experience had awakened something in her, a desire to use her platform for more than entertainment. She left the military and became a full-time advocate for veteran services, her channel growing from thousands to millions as she shared stories of hidden service and quiet sacrifice. Reeves and Chen made it through selection, emerging as 2 of the first graduates of the new Viper program. They would go on to careers that remained largely classified, their successes measured in lives saved rather than public recognition. Morrison's journey was the most complex. He struggled with every aspect of the training, not because he lacked skill, but because he was rebuilding himself from the ground up. Every assumption, every ingrained belief about strength and superiority had to be examined and discarded. The process was brutal, stripping away layers of ego to reveal the soldier underneath. 6 months into the program, he found himself on overwatch for a diplomatic convoy in a country that didn't officially exist. Through his scope, he watched a cleaner at the meeting site, an elderly man everyone ignored as he went about his work. But Morrison had learned to see differently now, and he noticed the man's deliberate positioning, the way his movements allowed him to observe every angle of approach. When the attack came, 3 shooters emerging from concealed positions, the cleaner moved first. The elderly man flowed into action with a grace that defied his apparent age, neutralizing one threat before Morrison could even radio a warning. Together, they stopped the assault, saving lives that would never know how close they'd come to ending. Later, as local security swarmed the scene, Morrison watched the cleaner quietly return to his mop and bucket. Their eyes met across the chaos, and the man gave him the slightest nod before disappearing into the crowd of onlookers. Morrison never learned the cleaner's name or his story, but he understood, finally and completely, the lesson Raven had tried to teach. Back at Fort Bragg, Raven's true work continued. The two network members she'd identified were arrested within hours of her revelation, their surprise at being taken down by intelligence gathered by a janitor, evident in the interrogation transcripts. The information she'd compiled over 15 years of patient observation proved devastating to the enemy network, leading to arrests across multiple countries. But the biggest operation was yet to come. The network's final play, an attempt to eliminate an entire summit of Allied Special Operations commanders, was scheduled for the following week. It would have been a decapitation strike that would have set back international cooperation by decades. Instead, it became a trap. Raven positioned herself in the one place nobody would think to look, among the service staff at the summit venue. While security forces watched for external threats, she moved through the kitchens and maintenance areas, invisible in her uniform, watching for the enemy within. She found them in the basement mechanical room, two men in maintenance coveralls who weren't on any employee list, working on devices that had nothing to do with HVAC systems. The tremor in her hands was particularly bad that day, the stress of the operation aggravating her condition. But trembling hands could still hold a pistol, and at close range, even nerve damage couldn't overcome decades of muscle memory. The confrontation was brief, violent, and witnessed by no one. By the time security arrived, responding to her quiet call, both men were neutralized, and the devices rendered safe. Raven was sitting on a pipe, looking tired in every one of her 48 years. "Viper 1 to base," she said into her radio, using a call sign she hadn't spoken in 15 years. "Threat neutralized. Summit is clear." General Stone found her there an hour later, after the devices had been removed and the would-be assassins taken away. The general sat beside her on the pipe, two warriors sharing a moment of quiet after the storm. "So what now?" Stone asked. "Your cover's blown globally. The video of you at Bragg has been viewed over 50 million times. You can't go back to being invisible." Raven considered this, absently massaging her trembling hand. Maybe it's time to stop hiding. 15 years is a long time to be dead. "The Viper program needs a permanent director," Stone offered. "Someone who understands both the technical and human sides of the job. The position's yours if you want it." "Teaching?" Raven mused. "Shaping the next generation?" "You've been doing it already, just from the shadows. This would make it official." Raven stood slowly, her joints protesting years of hard use. "On one condition." "Name it." "The cleaning staff get full security briefings and defensive training. They're the most vulnerable and most valuable intelligence assets we have. It's time we acknowledged that." Stone smiled. "Done. Anything else?" "Yeah," Raven said, a rare smile crossing her face. "I keep my janitor's uniform. You'd be amazed how much people reveal when they think you're just there to empty the trash." 3 months later, the Viper Training Center officially opened, with Major Raven Thorne, retired, as its director. The first class included not just special operations candidates, but also support staff, the cooks, cleaners, and maintenance workers who kept military installations running. Morrison, now Captain Morrison of the new Viper unit, served as her deputy. He'd kept the lesson close, developing a reputation for seeing potential where others saw only surface. His team specialized in deep cover operations, often posing as the invisible workers others overlooked. The morning of the ribbon cutting, Raven stood before the assembled dignitaries in her dress uniform, the tremor in her hands visible but unashamed. The Medal of Honor around her neck, finally accepted after 15 years of refusal, caught the light as she spoke. "Strength," she said, her voice carrying across the crowd, "isn't about physical power or the ability to dominate others. It's about service. It's about choosing to be the guardian no one sees, the protector no one thanks. It's about understanding that everyone, from the highest general to the newest janitor, has value, has dignity, has the potential to be the one who makes the difference. She paused, her green eyes sweeping the crowd, finding the faces of those who'd been there that morning at Fort Bragg. Each had traveled their own journey from that moment. Each had grown in their own way. "We are all links in a chain," she continued. "Remove one link, dismiss it as weak or unimportant, and the whole chain fails. Today, we forge a new chain, stronger because it excludes no one, resilient because it values everyone." The applause was thunderous, but Raven barely heard it. Her attention was caught by movement at the back of the crowd, a janitor, quietly adjusting his position to better observe the exits. Their eyes met, and Raven saw the subtle signs, the balanced stance, the careful positioning, the watchful alertness. She gave the slightest nod. The janitor returned it before going back to his work, invisible once more to everyone, but those who knew how to look. The ceremony concluded, the dignitaries departed, but Raven lingered. Morrison found her in her office later, not behind the imposing desk but at the window, watching the grounds crew work. "Regrets?" he asked. "No," she said simply. "Choices made, prices paid, but no regrets." "The tremor seems worse today," Morrison observed carefully. "Good days and bad days," Raven acknowledged. "The nerve damage is progressive. Eventually, I won't be able to shoot at all. But you'll still teach." "Teaching doesn't require steady hands," she said. "Just steady purpose." Morrison stood beside her, watching the workers below. "Do you think they know? The groundskeepers, the kitchen staff? Do they know what you did for them?" "Does it matter?" Raven asked. "We don't serve for recognition, Captain. We serve because it's right." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young recruit entered, nervous but determined. "Ma'am, I'm Private Chen, Major Chen's younger sister. I was hoping, could you teach me the breathing technique for shooting with nerve damage? I have essential tremor, and the doctor said I'd never qualify for sniper school, but—" Raven turned from the window, studying the young woman with those penetrating green eyes. Then she smiled, a real smile that transformed her face. "Doctors said I'd never shoot again either," she said. "Grab a rifle, Private. Let's see what impossible looks like today." As Morrison left them to their lesson, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning at Fort Bragg. Not just for him or his team, but for an entire military culture that was slowly learning to see beyond surface appearances. The message had spread far beyond their small circle. Military installations around the world reported increased attention to support staff welfare and security. Intelligence agencies quietly recruited from populations they'd previously overlooked. The invisible became visible. The dismissed became valued. But perhaps the most profound change was in the stories told in barracks and mess halls. Where once young soldiers boasted of their strength and mocked weakness, now they spoke in hushed tones of the janitor who could have killed them all, the cleaner who chose mercy over vengeance, the trembling hands that never missed. As the sun set over the Viper Training Center, Raven worked with Private Chen, patiently guiding her through breathing exercises designed to work with tremor rather than against it. The young woman's hands shook like autumn leaves, but her determination was steel. "Remember," Raven said, adjusting Chen's grip minutely, "your limitation is not your definition. It's just another factor to calculate, like wind or distance. The only real disability is the belief that you can't adapt." Chen took the shot. It wasn't perfect, far from it. But it hit the target, and that was a beginning. "Again," Raven commanded, and Chen smiled through her frustration, understanding that she was being offered something precious. The knowledge that different didn't mean less, that broken didn't mean useless, that strength came in forms the world rarely recognized. Outside, night fell over Fort Bragg. The facility settled into its evening routine, guards changing shifts, kitchen staff preparing the next day's meals, janitors beginning their rounds. To any observer, it looked like any other military installation, but for those who knew how to look, who had learned the lesson of the trembling sniper, the truth was different. Every shadow might hide a guardian. Every overlooked worker might be a hero in waiting. Every trembling hand might hold the power to change the world. The cycle continued, as eternal as the Ouroboros on Raven's arm. Death and rebirth, ending and beginning. The strong teaching the weak to find their hidden strength. The weak teaching the strong the power of humility. In her office, Raven Thorn cleaned her rifle with hands that shook but never faltered, preparing for tomorrow's lessons. On her desk, a simple plaque held the words she'd chosen as the Viper program's motto. True strength is invisible until the moment it's needed. Be ready, be humble, be the one nobody sees coming. The phone on her desk rang, a secure line that few people had access to. She listened for a moment, then smiled that dangerous smile that transformed her from grandmother to predator. Understood, she said simply. Viper 1 is always ready. She hung up and looked at Private Chen, who was still practicing, still fighting against her own limitations with quiet determination. Lesson's over for tonight, Raven announced. But if you're interested, there's a situation developing that requires specialized skills. Chen's eyes lit up despite her exhaustion. What kind of situation? Raven's smile widened. The kind where nobody expects the cleaning lady. As they prepared to leave, Raven touched the tattoo on her arm, a gesture she'd repeated countless times over the years. The serpent eating its tail, the eternal cycle, the reminder that every ending was just a new beginning in disguise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, new opportunities to serve from the shadows. But tonight, in this moment, she allowed herself a small satisfaction. The message had been delivered. The lesson had been learned. Respect the janitor. Value the invisible. Never assume you know someone's story based on their surface. And always, always remember, the most dangerous person in any room is the one everyone underestimates. The tremor in her hands continued its endless rhythm as she locked her office and stepped into the night, the brass key rattling softly against the lock. The North Carolina air hung thick with humidity, carrying the distant sounds of night training exercises, the pop of blank rounds, the bark of drill sergeants, the rumble of vehicles on maneuver. She paused on the steps, letting her eyes adjust to the darkness. To anyone watching, she was just another aging woman with a medical condition, moving carefully down the stairs, one hand gripping the rail for stability. Her graying hair caught the security lights, the messy bun slightly looser after the long day. The faded gray t-shirt she'd changed back into bore new stains from cleaning fluid and gun oil. Her dark pants had collected dust from the range, and her worn combat boots scuffed against each step with the careful placement of someone who couldn't quite trust their body anymore. A pair of young soldiers passed, heading for the barracks after late duty. They glanced at her briefly, the cleaning lady working late again, before returning to their conversation about weekend plans. They didn't notice how her trembling hand had shifted slightly on the rail, finding a grip that could become a weapon mount in less than a second. They didn't see how her other hand rested near her pocket, where the weight of a concealed sidearm pressed against worn fabric. She reached the bottom of the stairs and turned toward the parking lot, just another invisible worker heading home after another invisible day. The sodium lights cast long shadows between the vehicles, creating pools of darkness that most people hurried through without thought. But Raven moved through them deliberately, using each shadow to pause and listen, her trembling hand finding the cool metal of parked cars for support. Her pickup truck waited in the far corner, a weathered Ford that had seen better decades. Rust spotted the wheel wells, and the paint had faded to an indeterminate color somewhere between blue and gray. To anyone looking, it was the kind of vehicle a janitor might drive. Old, reliable, forgettable. They wouldn't notice the reinforced bumpers, the bullet-resistant glass that caught the light just differently enough, or the engine that purred with carefully maintained power. Deliberately positioned for multiple exit routes, 3 different paths to 3 different gates, though it looked like nothing more than an old vehicle parked in the cheapest spot. She paused at the driver's door, keys rattling in her unsteady grip. The metal jangled against itself, a small symphony of supposed frailty that masked decades of practiced deception. Across the lot, a security camera swept its predictable arc, its red eye blinking steadily in the darkness. In 12 seconds, it would point away, toward the main gate. She counted the sweep automatically, a habit that would never die, even if her hands would never again be steady enough for the work that had defined her. She waited, patient as always, shoulders slightly hunched in the universal posture of exhaustion. Just another tired worker, struggling with her keys, fumbling with the simple task of getting home after a long shift. The tremor made the act convincing, though she could have picked the lock in half the time it took to find the right key, exactly as it should be, until the moment it wasn't.
The stories end here, but the journey continues. Many new episodes are waiting for you. And if you enjoy, please take a moment to like, subscribe to RE